Welcome to the Assistant Lab podcast, hosted by Victoria Ratton and Anel Martin.
This podcast is dedicated to the executive assistant profession, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We've created this podcast for the outliers, the linchpins, the assistants who are serious about their careers. This is a podcast for those who are preparing for the future today.
This is a space for no-nonsense content, benchmarking and tracking industry and world trends, as well as interesting interviews with exceptionally inspirational people. The goal here is to stimulate new ways of thinking and being in this profession.
So, on with the show.
Welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab and another sterling interview. Oh my gosh, what a fun and inspiring hour we had with Fiona Shea. She is Executive Assistant to Sir Nigel Wilson, who is the Group CEO of Legal & General. You're going to learn a lot in this hour, and I think one of the big takeaways was how Fiona charted her career and found a happy place working in the financial sector. But also, again, lots of tips and hints that can help any assistant who's looking to move forward with their career. So enjoy, and please know that you can catch our podcast not just on Spotify and Apple, but also EPAA's YouTube channel as well. Thank you. Good morning, and welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab. Fiona, I'm absolutely delighted to have you with us today, and especially given you've just moved across the country as well. Having done that last year, I know how stressful that is. It's not a move up the road. So thank you, even more so, given that you just moved a few days ago. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And how did the move go? We should probably start with that and just set the scene for people. You've moved from London, or was it home counties?
I've moved from Hampshire down to Somerset. One of the joys of now being able to work hybrid. I'm a very understanding CEO who is completely supportive of me working in the office 3 days a week. So I figured I could do that with a slightly worse commute. So I've moved to Somerset for a bit more of a laid-back lifestyle. However, the trains this week will not be helping on that front at all because there's train problems. But yeah, hopefully it's all gonna pan out well.
You're still standing. Which is good after any move.
Everybody's unpacked now as well.
Yeah, it's a totally different way of life, as I found myself a year ago. Massive when I was used to being in London and the hustle and bustle and tubes and.
Yeah, I took the dog off this morning, and I was literally walking down the path, and a herd of cows walked towards me, and they were going from one field to another. And the dog and I just stood back and watched. Morning, girls. Morning. That's what I came here for.
Well, I must tell you, ladies, I'm very, very excited for both of you, and I'm heading the same way in February this coming year. You know, I think if we look back on COVID, at least there were some advantages. There weren't many, but I think we can all look at this and think, you know, at least there was this benefit that we could work remotely, and it doesn't really impact what you do for a living.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Fiona, you currently work at Legal & General. What's it like working within this sector as business support?
I've worked in a few sectors as business support, and I think financial services, the way it's different to others, I feel it's much more professional and fair. There's a very strong HR support. The benefits are great. The work-life balance is good. I've worked in Betfair for a couple of years, which was a online gambling business, and it was a bit of a startup mentality there, and that was very fun, very laid back and casual, but a lot of internal moves and quite a volatile business. But financial services feels secure. Professional, just it's kind of where I've worked most of my life, so it's my comfort zone.
And it's interesting you say that, because of course it was PAs from financial services who got affected in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial recession. I mean, where were you working back then when that recession kicked off?
Oh yeah, I was at
crikey.
PwC,
Okay.
and I was working for the team that were disbanding Lehman Brothers.
Oh,
So
wow.
I mean, for us at PwC, the business was excelling because it was extremely busy. And I also worked for Enron back in a few years before that. And they obviously came to a very, very sad demise at the end. And PwC, their liquidation as well. So during the recession in 2008, I wasn't really affected because my business that I was in at the time was doing really well. So it fine for me. I didn't really notice anything, but I did notice at the end of Enron, because that was the collapse of Enron and also Arthur Andersen, that there were a lot of listeners traipsing around London going to the same job interviews one after the other. My friend and I actually had 2 in a row, one after each other. So she literally came out, phoned me and said, oh, you don't want to go there, or you'll really like that one, that's more you than me. And it was really quite scary because at the time it was November. So it was just before Christmas. So that kind of year, looking for another job, it was really difficult. And I was actually unemployed from working in London for 3 months at that stage. But the official financial crash, the credit crunch in 2008 didn't really affect me, thankfully.
Do you think you came into it after Enron, being the big thing that it was back then? Do you think you built up some resilience after that? Because it was shocking in the business world, isn't it? I mean, when it actually happened.
Yeah, it was such a strange time, and that was probably my first professional corporate office job in London. And the way it changed towards the end, it was literally monitoring the share price, trying to find out whether we were going to be bought or not. There was a potential deal with Dynegy, I think it was, who were going to buy us, and then it all fell through. The share price was crashing. There wasn't a lot of work going on in the last couple of weeks. Most people were planning ahead. What are they going to do? They're not going to get paid. They've had expenses put through. The last week, I think I saw my boss cry, went into a meeting with PwC with a list of about 20 people he wanted to keep on the team and came out with half of that. And he was in tears. On the last day, he cried as he let us go. We went to the pub, which was then full of Enron employees. People were taking servers, artwork, stationery, laptops, you name it. Everyone was in the same boat. And it was a shocking time and an emotional time. But I mean, it's something to experience. I'm never going to experience something like that again. And it's a cracking interview opener.
Yeah. I'm sure. Which leads me to my next obvious question. Did you find any stigma attached when you walk into an interview and you say you are ex-Enron?
No,
That's good. That's good.
Only the joke was, oh, you'll be good at shredding then. And to be honest,
10 out of 10.
I didn't do any shredding. I do know that Arthur Andersen were based in the building and they were near me, and we had a relationship with them. The only thing that I remember doing towards the end was photocopying, loads of photocopying, and I had no idea what was going on at this point, at that stage. But no shredding. You know, it is.
I love that. So let's go back to the beginning, to 16-year-old Fiona. What happened then? Did you go to college? Did you go to university? And what was your kind of first few roles as you came out of the education system?
So I went to college for a year. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I left school. My grades weren't that great. I was having a bit of a family crisis at home. So my parents divorced when I was at school, and I didn't know where I wanted to live. So I was massively sidetracked. And then when it came to leaving school and picking what I wanted to do, I just didn't have a clue. So I went to college for a year just to give me more time to think about it. Went into waitressing in hotels for a year or two just to start earning money and gain some independence. And then where I lived at the time in Kent, I got an office job in a huge market research company where a lot of people in that specific town have worked. They've all gone through these doors. And I was only on the phones doing market research, which was very interesting, for 3 months. And then I got promoted into the administration team. And there was my first exposure to working with my own computer, email. And I think email was very new in those days. so it was such a novelty, and the things that we were allowed to get away with back then was absolutely shocking. But we'd be running marketing campaigns, mailings, interesting different phone-ins, like when the phone rang for National Canine Defence League, sponsor a dog, that would generate all these forms and leads, and that would come through the admin team, and we'd get teams off the phones to stuff them and post them, that kind of thing. So it was really good. I did some payroll and sent data to clients and stuff via modem, which was really weird, quite old-fashioned. It sounded like a fax machine. It would just send data via down a fax line to a client and let them know how the calls went that day. It was really bizarre. And then I think I stayed there for about just under a year, I think. And then I moved to London and I started working. My first job in London was actually with Rock Enterprises, so it was a dance company. It was a little bit off the wall, a family-run business, lots of dancing going on in the office, not by me, but it didn't feel right for me. I was doing a role that it just didn't feel secure. So from there was when I went to, I think actually, I left there and then went back to Kent and worked locally. Well, this is a good one. I worked for Bell UK, so Mini Baby Bell, the Laughing Cow, Port Salut Cheese Company. I worked all over
My
there.
husband's favourites.
Yeah, they are good. And a really smelly office. It was like the UK sales and distribution team. And I started off temping. I was working for the CEO, who was French and didn't have very much English, so I don't know why they employed me there, because I didn't really speak that well at French. But I said a couple of previous PAs had gone home at lunchtime and not come back, or they'd gone home in tears at the end of the day, and they just couldn't get the relationship right. So I was only there temporarily while they were finding a fluent French speaking assistant. So I set myself this challenge, right? I'm not going to walk out on this. I'm not going to be like the others. I'm going to set myself a task. I'm going to make him laugh every morning. So I'd come in, racking my brains on the bus on the way to work. What can I tell him? Trying to find certain jokes or remember things. And I'd crack a joke with him in the morning. It would make him laugh. It would make him warm up a bit, because he was quite bossy. And his office was full of piles of filing, and it was my job to get rid of it all. And I was so young and wet behind the ears, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I just went through all the papers. Okay, this one mentions this, so I'll file it there. And I got rid of the whole lot, and I stuck out the contract until they employed someone who was fluent. And then they moved me into all these other different departments. I worked in marketing, logistics, sales support as an assistant to the head of sales, reception cover. I really enjoyed it, and I stayed there for a year or two. And then that was when I went to Enron. That's when I realised I wanted to go back to London. I wanted to commute and earn bigger bucks and have a bit more of a career progression. And that's when I started working back up in London.
There's something really, because I know that London pool, and I know I was born in London, but part of my childhood was in Kent. There's a pool with PA roles and now in London. I don't know whether that's the same with Joburg and your financial capitals, but there's just something, especially back then. I don't know whether younger PAs might feel that now, but there was just such a big draw to go and be an assistant in the big bad city. And frankly, I look back at my career now, and I had a fantastic career in the city. It was hard work, long hours, and a few bloopers along the way, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
No.
But you mentioned the big city. I live in Pretoria, which is it's about an hour from Johannesburg, and there's a 20% difference in salaries. So for us, the commute, remember, we don't have access to trains, so everyone has to jump in a car. In the good old days, now we've got the car train, but you did that. Even if you were spending 4 hours a day on the road, you did that for the extra money. So, and while you're still young and ambitious, you want those things. You want to be able to say, I work for this company. Those things are important as you are going through the ranks.
And that's the time to do it when you're young. You've got the energy.
You need it for Great Britain's train services, that's for sure.
Absolutely. While we're talking about trains and challenges, Fiona, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing our profession at the moment?
I think for assistants, progression and recognition has always been a sticking point throughout my career. Most of the roles I've had, I've really hated when it comes to year-end review, mid-year review, bonus time, because it never really affected me. I'd have to go through that whole rigorous process of filling out the form, fighting my corner, evidencing what I've done over the years, why I'm better than my peers, and pretty much getting nothing for it. And it was I really hated it. And now at Legal and General, I actually feel like it's deserved, and I have a better bonus than I've ever had before. And it just makes me feel like I'm appreciated as part of the team. A couple of roles before this, I was working for Friends Life, and I was working for the COO there. And I went to the leadership team meetings and would sit in the meetings and was kind of considered as part of the team, part of the leadership. They'd go around the table and then they'd get to me and I'd think, oh my God, what am I going to say? And I thought, well, that's your responsibility to come back to the next month's meeting with something to say. So I make it my job to go to speak to the other assistants in the team across the business, find out how the land lies, how everyone's feeling, and I'd have something to say at that meeting next time. But I think progression, a lot of support roles in businesses, there's probably not that many grades to work your way from the most junior position to the most senior position. And then once you've got to that most senior position in that grade, if you're not quite at the top, you've still got to wait for someone to leave, unless you take a side role into business management, chief of staff or project manager or something different. So I think in a good way, being a PA opens a lot of opportunities to those other roles. But I think it's also a bit of a sticking point that if you like being a PA and you love the diary management, you love the organising, but you're already at the top grade, where the heck are you meant to go now unless the one above you leaves? That's quite a sticking point, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's probably a bit of a bone of contention with a lot of people who are ready to make a bit of a shift in their career and not quite sure, and then you end up kind of plateauing and staying in a job that it's okay, it keeps you ticking along, but you've lost that kind of buzz that you had earlier on. I've just got a little question on Legal and General. Was it prevalent to you in the interview process that they were going to be a much more supportive employer? Did their kind of culture come out in the interview, or is that something you found out when you got into post and got to know the company better?
When I came to Legal and General, I actually worked with one of the previous PAs who worked for my boss. So we were at Friends Life and we moved across to Aviva, and I saw the vacancy for EA to the CEO of Legal and General, and I thought, oh, hang on, I know who did that role before. So I pulled her aside and had a quick meeting with her, and I said, what was it like in your day? And I think she did a very good job of trying to put me off, not intentionally, but it was very, very different in her day to how it is now. And she was on her own. She was working 8 till 6, no breaks, no support. And it did sound like it was really, really hard. But I thought, that's how, it's like a relationship. That's how you take that job. That's how you manage it. But I'm not like that. I'm not going to do 8 till 6 with no break and have no help. I will manage it differently, and I'll go in and set that expectation. So when I applied for the role, it wasn't the case anyway. There were a team of 2 in the exec office. And I met with them. Well, there was only one because one of them was covering the vacancy. And I met with them both, and they were so lovely. And one of them's still there now. And that's one of the things that won me over, was the team that they had between the 2 of them in managing this big exec office on their own. But since then, it's now 4 of us, and the support that we have in that team is something like I've never experienced before. We are managing the chairman, the CEO, the head of general counsel and legal, the CFO, the group head of HR, corporate affairs, all together in a way that's so seamless that we have complete exposure to inbox and diary of everybody and each other, that when one of us is off, we just slip in to their role really easily.
Amazing.
There's no handover almost, because we just know what they're doing. So it's brilliant in that sense. And that's how, I mean, especially since COVID, that I feel massively supported with regards to the hybrid working. We would never have been able to do this before COVID, but because we have such a great team. And my boss is one of those people that likes people in the office and needs that face-to-face support. And if I'm not there, I've got someone who is my legs running around and passing printing or greeting guests. So we have that relationship down to a fine art. It's brilliant, and it's the only thing that
incredible.
Makes it work. Yeah.
I just want to roll back. You made an incredibly important point. And I think it's happened to every single assistant somewhere along the line. When you talk to the previous EA, you know, to me, I'm just bringing this up again because I've had the same experience and I think it's so relatable. And you make such a good point. You need to manage it your way. You need to walk in with a clean slate and no preconceptions. Otherwise, you are setting yourself up for failure. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's like a boyfriend, girlfriend, marriage, relationship. It's the same thing. He might have been not very nice to that girlfriend, but it doesn't mean to say he's going to be like that with you, because you're going to be a different person. You've got different chemistry, different boundaries, different goals, and your manner is different and everything like that. So yeah, completely. This other assistant was probably quite similar to me, and he really liked her, and she stayed at 5 years, I think. And I wanted to beat the 5 years. I have beaten her 5 years, so I'm quite chuffed with that. But it's like, it is how you manage it. I can't really explain it. It's chemistry between the two of you that makes it work.
And I think there's also a certain level of assertiveness and confidence that comes into play. You know, if I look at my 20-year-old self as an assistant, my 30-year-old self as an assistant, and then close to 40 years old as an assistant, those are 3 different people. So I think, you know, if you had met me in my 20s, I probably would have let you walk all over me, and I still felt like I had to prove myself. But when you get to those late 30s, you get to a point where you say, this is what I can give you, and I have a good CV, so if you don't want me, I can move on. I'm not hard up, and I'm not trying to prove myself. So I think we all kind of progress through that, and for me, it really comes down to, number one, confidence to be able to set those boundaries, being assertive enough. Also, I think it comes to a level of, you know, I also have a life at this point. You know, I'm, you know, not in my 20s and unattached. So I think that plays into it in some respects.
Yeah. I think you develop that self-worth over time, don't you?
Amen.
Well, it's lessons learned, isn't it, from any mistakes you've made during your career in terms of ending up, you know, with the wrong company and boss. And it's happened to me a couple of times. It's been missold at interview. I've said yes, and then it just hasn't worked out. And then lesson learned. And I think, yeah, as you get a little bit older, you're very much aware of what you do want as an EA and the sort of company you want to work for. Yeah, definitely.
And more savvy. You know, you can see the in the interview, having gone through that missold, misrepresentation, or that really toxic culture, you can then, you're tuned in and you're looking for clues. So I think that also helps when you are joining a new company, that you're a little bit more discerning.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. If I was looking for an EA job now, just hear me out. If I was looking for an EA job now, and I've done this when I've looked before, one of the first things I say that really is a real bugbear of mine, I don't want to work for a lazy leader. And there are lazy CEOs and directors out there. That's not a good fit with me. I've worked with one before where I'm constantly mopping up, trying to chivvy them out to meetings and doing things that's actually part of their job. That just, it's not a good fit with me. I'll work really hard for somebody, a leader that works hard as well and is inspiring type thing. But I've had a couple of situations where I'm thinking they don't even really want this job themselves. Perhaps they're just here for whatever reason, and it just isn't that kind of fit for me, because not every CEO and director is perfect.
Well, I have to tell you, Vic, I can so relate. I worked for a group executive in my former company who will remain nameless, but he was exactly this personality, and after I left his office, he was fired within the next 6 months. A clue for me should have been when they started calling me the assistant executive or group executive. That should have been a little clue that I was picking up more than my fair share. But I agree with you. There's certain things I like a leader who is assertive, who knows what they want, who can make decisions quickly. And I don't mind working for somebody who's grumpy or difficult and who has high expectations, because I'm willing to meet that. So on the other side of the spectrum, a leader who's too soft, who lets, who has this open door policy where everything just turns into a circus, who is too nice. Yeah. I am now going to be controversial and say, I don't enjoy working for people who are too nice. Luckily, in my own experience, I haven't had a lot of them.
No, I don't think I have actually either.
Do you think, coming back to that, do you think it's because of the environments that you favor? Because you tend to, from what you've discussed with us, you tend to favor sort of very stable, serious environments. Do you think that's part of it?
It could be. This could make for a very interesting debate, actually. It could be.
It is a tricky question to answer, though. I guess because some PAs have not perhaps thought about it. I only ended up thinking about it because I made a couple of wrong career moves, and that's just because the company culture and that person was sold to me incorrectly at interview. And often you don't find out until you've got into a firm.
Until you're on the ground, right?
Yeah, there's only so much you can dig in, you can do at an interview. We talked about red flags in the last podcast, and I remember there was a CEO, because I've worked in part of the financial services as well, captive finance and insurance. I've done my bit in those. And I remember I went for an interview, and I could tell the recruiters, having worked at Hayes for so long as an EA, I know their speak. I've got them down to a T. And they're ramping up this CEO, and I'm thinking, do you know what? I need to go and do some digging around the insurance market to find out, because there's something is not right with their body language. And what I did find out was completely and utterly shocking. So that was not just from a couple of PAs, but from some brokers. I mean, this CEO had a terrible reputation in the sector, and some of it had leaked out to the press, but not enough. But again, it made me run a mile. And I was just kind of thinking, I feel sorry for the PA who got that job.
But Vic, you're talking about HR speak because you've seen it from the inside. It's a little bit like when they advertise a house or a vintage car, and it says it needs a little bit of TLC. And we know it's a complete train wreck, stay away from it. There is certain lingo that recruiters use that kind of put your back hairs on edge.
It's the recruiter told me a few months afterwards. We still kept in touch. I've still got some fantastic friends from the recruitment industry in London, and she said in the end she gave up trying to recruit for that role. And she told me everything. She said, Vic, I've had a 30-year career as a recruiter, and never ever have I turned down wanting to recruit for somebody. She said, but in the end, I just this was getting too much, it was crossing too many lines. And frankly, I didn't want to put in any candidates into that environment.
Into that situation.
Yeah.
Because you have those executives where it starts becoming like a revolving door. If somebody goes through 8 assistants in 6 months, surely somebody in charge has to ask questions. Surely that costs time and money. There is a bottom line. There is a problem, and that should be addressed. But strangely enough, I don't know how it is in the UK, but very seldom is that addressed with the person who's creating the issue. They just keep that revolving door going. And I think it's actually so counterproductive.
Massively. You just made me think about a situation years ago where I went for a job interview for a business owner, entrepreneur, who was a woman, very, very, very demanding woman in a luxury. Are you okay?
We'll edit you out, don't worry. Just start that again as if we haven't said anything. Just start the story again.
So there was a job interview that I went for years ago, probably 20 years ago, working for a woman who owned her own business, an entrepreneur who ran a high-end luxury interior design style business. And a lot of her clients were celebrities and ultra high net worth individuals. And I went for the interview, and the assistant currently in the role was interviewing me, and I think the role actually said, which is a massive red flag now, Devil Wears Prada crossed with absolutely fabulous. And I thought,
Oh
that
my
sounds
God.
hilarious, but it's not. And she said that this lady likes you to be in before her. She likes her vitamins and drinks lined up on the table, her thingy shots and God knows what else. And she's thrown things across the office in front of the other people there before, her assistant. Sometimes have to go to her house and prep things for an evening party, or collect her luggage, or let someone in to fix a cooker, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of got distracted. Instead of listening to the job, I was listening to the voice of the assistant who was interviewing me, and I started to feel really sorry for her. And I had to stop her and say, I'm so sorry, but this really isn't for me. And I can hear in your voice that you're desperate to leave, but you're never going to sell this role like that. You're being too honest, and it sounds like he's a nightmare. When I think about it now, I work for a man who is very demanding sometimes and can be quite difficult, and I like to put his special drinks out for him. I like to do that. I don't want to be told to do it or shouted at across the office. I want respect, and then I'm going to want to look after you. So I think that was a big learning curve for me, and I think it was probably a big learning curve for that assistant who was trying to replace herself. You're not going to get anyone on board wanting to work for somebody like that. They've got to like that person.
And that's a very hard sell. You know, I'm thinking back to an episode in my own career where I was on a panel where we were recruiting for one of our top managers, and one of the people said, I'd literally put out a campfire with my face before I work for this woman. And that was the reputation. So now you are thinking, okay, so how do we fill this chair? You know, this is now widely known that this person is on that Devil Wears Prada level. It takes a very special fit and a lot of negotiation. Otherwise, you just cannot do it every 6 months. So I hear what you're saying, that dilemma of, unfortunately, they also have a brand, and that brand story is told widely. So the pool of potential, I don't want to say victims, but candidates gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
And it's hard. I think there is a bit of a code of honour, badge of honour in the assistant world where you don't want to lie to a candidate, do you? You want to throw out a couple of nuggets hoping that they'll get it, but you, like
Fiona
Fiona
said,
the hint. She
don't
wanted to get out herself.
Yeah.
And you try to be discreet, because that's also built into the PA personality, but you also don't want to throw one of your own under the bus if you've lived it. So it's a fine line. Talking about all these characters and episodes, looking back on your own career so far, is there anything that you look back and you say that was a defining moment, you know, that was a dead end, and you know, these are the lessons I've learned, these are the things I would change? How do you feel about where you are at the moment?
I feel like okay, I can recognize the positions on my CV where I feel like that was a wrong move. I don't regret any of them, but I think I could tell quite quickly when I worked somewhere that it didn't feel like me, that it probably wouldn't last long. And they weren't financial services, which is bizarre. But I do think my pivot point in my career was when I was at PwC, because I was there for 6 years. I worked in 3 teams over that time. I got promoted to the senior assistant level, and I also worked for the PA manager who was responsible for the managing of 60 to 70 assistants. So I worked for her as well. I got a lot of exposure into interviewing, training, mentoring, onboarding another team that they'd bought. Loads. I got so much experience and exposure in that role that really kind of instilled that it was the right move, and it's the right job, and it's what I really enjoy. But at the end of the 6 years, it was one of those situations where I'd been there for that length of time and I'd exhausted all opportunities, and I just felt like I had to leave at that time. My last position was onboarding a small consultancy firm which they'd bought in the West End, and it was kind of like the perfect step out for me. So I got that all on board, and then I left there, and that's when I went to Betfair, which I knew when I went for the first interview, it felt a little bit too cool for school. I'm not going to fit in here. And I didn't get that role, and then they contacted me about another role, and then eventually I got that, and then I got promoted into the exec office. So that was my first exposure to being in an exec suite. But the industry just wasn't right. It didn't feel right, and it was very volatile. A lot of changes. But PwC was where I learned the most. And then here at Legal and General, working for Sir Nigel Wilson, I feel like I would be happy if this was my last PA role. If this is where
amazing.
I end, because I don't want to tarnish my career by taking on another challenge and fail, or do a miserable job at something. I think when you work for someone for a certain amount of time, or such a long time, I feel like I'm good at it, I'm comfortable at it, I'm not complacent, but I'm happy.
Settled.
When this role ends, whenever that is, however that is, I will be happy if I ended up taking on another challenge, or if I left and walked dogs for a living around Somerset Fields. I would be happy if that's where I ended my PA career. It's the best job I've had, and the best team, and yeah, I'm really happy.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Literally, I've got goosebumps.
Oh wow.
No, seriously, because I mean, obviously, you know, I've met thousands of PAs over the years, networked and events and what have you, and unfortunately in recent years there's a number of PAs that are just completely dissatisfied with their careers for whatever reason, and it is sad, and you don't want to kind of end your career on a low note when you've had. So I think it's almost better to recognise this is a really good job, and if that's where it ends, then I just think that's an amazing thing to say. Yeah.
And I mean, sorry, it speaks volumes about the relationship you had. You mentioned earlier about chemistry and fit. You know, I think we underestimate how important that is. I think recruiters seldom take the time to think about, is the personality a fit? We can fix the skills, but if these two people, their communication styles, their conflict styles, if they don't fit together, you know, I always say to delegates, you spend more time awake with your boss than you do with your partner. You know, that really needs to be a good relationship. You know, it doesn't have to be friends that go out for drinks, but what I'm saying is it has to be a solid professional relationship where you've got good communication. So to me, I think that was what struck me about what you said now. You get that one boss in your career where you know you're never going to have a better fit than this.
Yeah, and you know, it wasn't easy. It didn't come naturally. It was. I think this role and my role at Friends Life, I specifically remember it taking a year to get comfortable, to feel confident, to know what I can and can't offer, and you know how I can interact with this person and get the best response from them. Because there's that when I joined, I was told don't mother him, don't boss him, don't do this, don't do that, and I thought, oh my god, how am I going to get him to sign this bloody document then? You have to do things in your own way, and I'm a whiz at it now. And I feel like because I'm so happy with my job and where I am, I need to get all this mentoring of other PAs. So I'm currently mentoring one person at the moment, but I feel like when I speak to them, she says I energize her and she needs to talk to me every morning, but I feel like, no, you're really, really good. You need to do this, you need to do that. I just want to kind of pass that information and knowledge on to somebody else so that they can get the best out of their career as well.
And actually that brings me on to another question. We've been talking to everybody so far on this show about the fact that young people are just not interested in these roles, and we have to face facts about that. It's kind of been mopped up under this admin umbrella, and we know there's lots of different professions under the admin umbrella, but you speak to a lot of young people and try and sell this and say you can have a career, you can do this, that and the other, and it's kind of deadpan face moment. What do you think about, you know, or what would you say to any young person thinking about coming into the profession but not really sure?
For starters, it needs to be the people doing careers day at school need to have an idea of what this is and where it can go. You can start as an office admin in a TV company or a runner, or doing something really junior, and run and work your way up into production, or being PA to Simon Cowell, or something really spectacular. There are so many jobs that I've seen that is traveling PA. You will be traveling with the CEO, entrepreneur, business, startup, whatever, around the world. You could be 24/7. Okay, if you're young and you don't have a family and commitments, it's a brilliant place to go. It's a brilliant career, because you can do all sorts. You can be safe and work in finance, banking, insurance, whatever, recruitment. You could learn the ways of how recruiters work, and then eventually progress out of being a PA and end up being a recruiter. I think it opens a lot of doors. I think people look at PAs as maybe a more modern term of secretary, and it's not that at all. Sorry, I'm just unlocking my screen because my screen just locked and I can't see you. It's not that at all. No. You pick the right industry, if it's something that you're passionate about, or you get a great boss, it can go really far.
And open a lot of doors.
Couldn't agree more. And I think you make the same point that a lot of our interview or guests have made, is that even if this is not a long-term solution for you, if you come into this with the right attitude, sky's the limit.
Yeah, massively. And I've spoken to people over my career who used to be assistants, and they're directors, business owners, all sorts. So it gives me a massive respect for them as well, having had experience in my role. Definitely.
I think, do you know what, I was thinking about this the other day. We were having a chat in a WhatsApp group of assistants Anel and I are in, and we normally talk about kind of fitness and recipes and things like that, but we got chatting about, actually, isn't it about time as an industry that we need to start having panels of ex-PAs and talking about where they are now? You know, half the EPAA board now are no longer assistants. They've moved into different, professions and stuff. And before, when I've suggested this over the last 20 years I've been running PA events, there's been quite a defensive attitude from the industry. Well, it's not a stepping stone career, it's a career. I know that, but we also have to tally that up now, that we've got the TikTok generation in the workforce. We've got millennials such as myself who are not going to stay in the same job for 40 years. So why can't it be a great career for somebody for 5 to 10 years, and that then they go on to something else? And if the role of the EA or PA has helped them to be able to get to that place, then I think that's a good thing, and I think we should support them the whole time they're doing this job.
There shouldn't be any stigma attached to being a PA, whether it's a permanent thing or a stepping stone. There shouldn't be any stigma attached to it, because other people do that in other industries as well. It's not a problem. It's experience, it's growth, it's learning.
And we decided we want to have more panels next year, especially at our national conference, which is now going to be in London, to have a panel of ex-PAs so that people know what doors are potentially open to them, where they could go. And I'm more than happy to lead that conversation in the UK, rather than saying to people, which I have done in the past, and like, well, why do you want to leave it? You can, keep moving on to great roles. But society's changed now, the working world has changed, and actually, we were laughing last night, me and my husband, Fiona, we were watching the Great British Bake Off, catching up on that. And one of those things that I didn't know I was very good at in the city, all the PAs in the city used to call me Miss King, and so did my husband, because everything was nuked in a microwave. But I've developed a love of cooking, Indian food. But I'm watching Bake Off, and it's the first time I've ever watched Bake Off, and it's been going for like over a decade. And I said to Mark, you know what, when I get to that age, I think I either want to be doing something to do with dogs, like we have some sort of dog rescue place, or I'm going to be running a little, cafe or restaurant in Dorset somewhere, cooking food for people. So as life's gone on for me, I've discovered, even moving down to Dorset, I'm discovering more stuff about me that I didn't know because I was in the city for so long, if that makes sense.
It could just be relocating that makes you think that your priorities are different, and it's not a wasted career, because the experience and the knowledge that we've gained over the years of being an assistant gives us a proper head start in setting up your own business or starting something completely new.
Yeah, definitely.
And Vic and I can totally relate to that. I mean, we've both transitioned into running our own companies, and you know, it's not been easy, but I do think that the skill set that you acquire over your career really sets you up for success, because you've had contact, you know, if you're a finance person, you work within your finance bubble. But as an assistant, you work with the IT guys, you work with HR, you work cross-functionally, and you're exposed to a lot of things very directly. And you're exposed to how business leaders think, which I think is great free management training. I just wish more assistants would really tap into that.
Yeah.
And you know, I think the biggest thing is actually, which you've clearly displayed, and it's just finding out what you really, really want. I remember Richard Branson's first ever proper PA, Penny Pike. She passed away during the pandemic, but she was his PA for about 30 odd years, I think. And I'd been, she was speaking at many of the PA conferences that I had been around the world. And I remember we were in America and she was the keynote speaker. And one of the things that she said, which really people were quite shocked about, but I think it opened a lot of assistants' minds, is she said, you know, initially with Virgin, it was Virgin Records, you know, we had some ramshackle office in Elephant and Castle. You know, I was being paid in records to begin with because there was no money to pay me properly. But she saw something in Richard and there was that synergy there and they kept going. And she said where she started to not enjoy it was when it became that big corporate company of Virgin International flights and records. It was, I mean, you know, masses and masses of stuff. And she said she actually enjoyed being there through that entire startup stage, getting it to that point. And she did stay for a number of years whilst it was the big Virgin brands, and then obviously retired. And I think that was a big lesson, because actually for some of us, being in a startup is some PA's worst nightmare, but they don't know it until they've tried it. And then for other PAs, you know, you've said, Fiona, you like financial services, and that's your happy
know your
place,
niche,
your happy sector.
And
that's a big thing to come out of today's conversations, that perhaps a few more assistants need to sit there and do a bit of reflection and ask about, you know, ask themselves, where do I really want to work?
And where do I thrive? Where do I find that? Where am I used to my full potential? Where do I feel that I am the right tool for this job? You know, I think you make a very good point. I am one of those people that they usually bring in when you've got a new executive starting. So that it's not necessarily start up, but starting fresh with somebody almost on an 18-month cycle, you know, building it up, getting it settled, and then moving on to the next person. And I don't think a lot of assistants would thrive in that environment, but I really did, because I got to form a foundation. Fiona, you mentioned earlier onboarding. You know, onboarding is such a critical part of how successful that employee becomes eventually. So I think, you know, like you said, you've got to go and find that thing that works for you within the profession and the environment you want to be in, the type of person you want to work with, not just default to whatever's on the table.
Yeah, or whatever's offered. Don't just take anything that's offered.
Yeah.
Make sure it feels right.
And absolutely. I think kind of wrapping up our discussion, is there any kind of tips or stuff that you want to share, lessons learned that you want other assistants to hear?
What do you wish you could tell young Fiona?
I think 20 odd years ago, I would probably during my period at PwC, when I started to get a lot more experience and confidence and knowledge, and the doors of opportunities were opening a bit more. Don't get so cocky. Just think things through before actioning. Just because somebody says something to you, and I don't want to give anything away because it's quite personal, doesn't mean that you have to action on it. So I was covering for an assistant, the PA manager, who was off. I don't want to go into too much detail, but that somebody raised something to me and I reacted in a way that, could I have done it differently now? Yeah, I still remember it to this day, what I said, how I said it, and what the comeback was. And really, at the end of the day, did I really need to do anything about it? No. Nothing would have happened. Nothing would have gone wrong. I just was too quick and too cocky. So I think just think things through, but also have the confidence to walk into the room and have something to say. If you're going to work for a senior member of the team and you want to be treated as part of the team, act like it. If you're at the table in the meeting, make sure you've got something to say. It doesn't have to be about you. It doesn't have to be about the assistants. It could just be something that you noticed in the team. There's a deadline coming up. Online learning needs completing. All sorts of things that we manage that we just don't think we've got a place to say, but we have.
Yeah. And that's a huge takeaway, Fiona. That really is massive. You know, we often have the discussion, I want to be part of the management team. I want to be treated as an equal. Those people who are included have an obligation to step up and really earn that spot at the table. You know, the chair's now been pulled out, you know, sit down and make your presence felt.
You've thrown out a lot of amazing nuggets during this interview. You really have.
I can't believe it's almost an hour. It absolutely flew by. It felt like a 15-minute conversation. Thank you very, very much. It really, really was very interesting. And I think a lot of things that we think about, that these podcasts are so important because we share these learnings that we had to learn the hard way. Hopefully somebody listens to this podcast and picks up those clues so that they don't have to make the same mistakes or go through those same issues.
Oh, well, Fiona, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm just really pleased, and I wish you continued success in your move and settling into Somerset.
I hope the unpacking is smooth and easy. And please, you know, I think the most important thing for me, looking at the conversation we've just had, is you get to that point in your life where you know what you want, you know where you're going, and you're unapologetic about that. So I think a lot of people don't have the confidence to do that. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time. And until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill set.